Welcome to Hockey Whiz Talks podcast. In this podcast, I will give an update on the current NHL standings and playoff picture. In first place in the Atlantic Division are the Florida Panthers. With 85 points in 66 games, they have 218 goals for versus 177 goals against. Florida has a 22-10-2 record at home and a 19-12-1 record on the road. The Panthers are 8-2 in their last 10 games. In second place in the Atlantic Division are the Toronto Maple Leafs. With 81 points in 65 games, Toronto has scored 208 goals for versus 193 goals against. The Maple Leafs have a 20-12-1 record at home versus a 19-11-2 record on the road. Toronto is 6-3-1 in their last 10 games. In third place in the Atlantic Division are the Tampa Bay Lightning with 79 points in 65 games. Tampa has scored 228 goals for versus 177 goals against. The Lightning have a 23-8-2 record at home versus a 14-15-3 record on the road. Tampa Bay is 6-3-1 in their last 10 games. In first place in the Metropolitan Division are the Washington Capitals with 94 points in 66 games. Washington has 139 goals for versus 174 goals against. The Capitals have a 21-7-6 record at home versus a 22-8-2 record on the road. Washington is 6-4 in their last 10 games. In second place in the Metropolitan Division are the Carolina Hurricanes with 82 points in 65 games. Carolina has 208 goals for versus 176 goals against. The Hurricanes have a 26-7-1 record at home versus a 13-15-3 record on the road. Carolina has a 7-3 record in the last 10 games. The New Jersey Devils are in third place in the Metropolitan Division with 78 points in 67 games. New Jersey has scored 201 goals for versus 170 goals against. New Jersey has a 17-11-4 record at home versus a 19-14-2 record on the road. The Devils are 5-5 in their last 10 games. The Ottawa Senators hold the first wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference with 75 points in 65 games. They have 191 goals for versus 185 goals against. Ottawa has a 29-2 record at home versus a 15-16-3 record on the road. The Senators have a 6-3-1 record in the last 10 games. The Columbus Blue Jackets hold the second wildcard spot in the Eastern Conference with 70 points in 65 games. Columbus has 217 goals for versus 217 goals against. Columbus has a 27-4 record at home versus a 11-19-4 record on the road. The Blue Jackets are 5-5 in their last 10 games. In ninth place are the New York Rangers with 70 points in 66 games. They have 199 goals for versus 201 goals against. The New York Rangers have a 16-14-3 record at home versus a 16-14-3 record on the road. The Rangers are 5-3-2 in the last 10 games. In 10th place in the Eastern Conference are the Montreal Canadiens with 69 points in 65 games. Montreal has 194 goals for versus 215 goals against. Montreal has a 16-12-4 record at home versus a 15-15-3 record on the road. The Habs are 6-2-2 in their last 10 games. In 11th place in the Eastern Conference are the Detroit Red Wings with 68 points in 65 games. Detroit has 189 goals for versus 207 goals against. Detroit has a 17-15-3 record at home versus a 14-13-3 record on the road. Detroit is 3-6-1 in their last 10 games. In 12th place in the Eastern Conference are the Boston Bruins with 68 points in 67 games. They have 182 goals for versus 212 goals against. Boston has a 19-11-5 record at home versus a 11-18-3 record on the road. Boston is 3-5-2 in their last 10 games. In 13th place in the Eastern Conference are the New York Islanders with 65 points in 64 games. The New York Islanders have 174 goals for versus 192 goals against. The Islanders have a 15-13-2 record at home versus a 14-15-5 record on the road. The Isles have a 4-6 record in the last 10 games. In 14th place in the Eastern Conference are the Philadelphia Flyers with 64 points in 67 games. They have 192 goals for versus 227 goals against. The Flyers have a 16-18-1 record at home versus a 12-13-7 record on the road. Philly is 4-5-1 in their last 10 games. In 15th place in the Eastern Conference are the Pittsburgh Penguins with 64 points in 68 games. They have 195 goals for versus 247 goals against. Pittsburgh has a 16-13-5 record at home versus an 11-18-5 record on the road. The Penguins are 4-5-1 in their last 10 games. Finally, in 16th place in the Eastern Conference are the Buffalo Sabres, who have 56 points in 64 games. They have 202 goals for versus 227 goals against. Buffalo has a 16-14-3 record at home versus a 9-19-3 record on the road. Buffalo is 3-6-1 in their last 10 games. And now a word from our sponsor. Check out my scouting blog at HockeyWiz777scouting.com. Listen to my scouting blog podcast on podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/HockeyWiz777scouting. In first place in the Central Division are the Winnipeg Jets with 94 points in 66 games. They have 230 goals for versus 153 goals against. Winnipeg has a 24-5-4 record at home versus a 21-12-0 record on the road. Winnipeg is 6-3-1 in their last 10 games. In second place in the Central Division are the Dallas Stars with 86 points in 64 games, 221 goals for versus 166 goals against, 24-7-1 record at home versus an 18-13-1 record on the road. Dallas is 8-2 in their last 10 games. In third place in the Central Division are the Colorado Avalanche with 81 points in 66 games. Colorado has 220 goals for versus 192 goals against. The Avalanche have a 22-10-2 record at home versus a 17-14-1 record on the road. Colorado has a 7-2-1 record in the last 10 games. In first place in the Pacific Division are the Vegas Golden Knights with 85 points in 65 games. Vegas has 219 goals for versus 177 goals against. The Golden Knights have a 24-7-3 record at home versus a 15-12-4 record on the road. Vegas is 7-2-1 in their last 10 games. In second place in the Pacific Division are the LA Kings with 79 points in 64 games. LA has 184 goals for versus 169 goals against. LA is 22-3-4 at home versus 13-17-5 on the road. The Kings are 5-3-2 in the last 10 games. In third place in the Pacific Division are the Edmonton Oilers with 78 points in 65 games. Edmonton has 209 goals for versus 192 goals against. The Oilers have a 20-11-2 record at home versus a 17-13-2 record on the road. In the last 10 games, Edmonton has a 3-7 record. The Minnesota Wild hold the first wildcard spot in the Western Conference with 79 points in 66 games. Minnesota has 183 goals for versus 189 goals against. The Wild have a 15-14-3 record at home versus a 22-10-3 record on the road. Minnesota is 4-5-1 in their last 10 games. The Calgary Flames hold the second wildcard spot in the Western Conference with 71 points in 64 games. Calgary has 167 goals for versus 186 goals against. The Flames have an 18-10-5 record at home versus a 12-13-6 record on the road. Calgary is 4-2-4 in the last 10 games. In ninth place in the Western Conference are the Vancouver Canucks with 71 points in 65 games. They have 178 goals for versus 198 goals against. Vancouver is 13-12-7 at home versus 17-12-4 on the road. Vancouver is 4-6 in the last 10 games. In 10th place in the Western Conference are the Utah Hockey Club with 69 points in 65 games. They have 185 goals for versus 193 goals against. Utah has a 13-13-7 record at home versus a 16-12-4 record on the road. Utah Hockey Club is 6-2-2 in their last 10 games. In 11th place are the St. Louis Blues, who have 69 points in 66 games. They have 190 goals for versus 199 goals against. St. Louis has a 15-14-3 record at home versus a 16-14-4 record on the road. St. Louis is 6-2-2 in the last 10 games. In 12th place in the Western Conference are the Anaheim Ducks, who have 63 points in 65 games. They have 175 goals for versus 203 goals against. Anaheim is 15-15-2 record at home versus a 13-15-5 record on the road. The Ducks have a 3-6-1 record in their last 10 games. The Seattle Kraken are in 13th with 60 points in 66 games. They have 197 goals for versus 216 goals against. Seattle has a 15-15-4 record at home versus a 13-19-0 record on the road. Seattle is 5-5 in the last 10 games. In 14th place are the Nashville Predators, who have 57 points in 64 games. They have 170 goals for versus 221 goals against. Nashville has a 17-12-3 record at home versus the 8-20-4 record on the road. Nashville is 6-4 in the last 10 games. Second to last in the Western Conference are the Chicago Blackhawks, who have 49 points in 66 games, with only 180 goals for versus 231 goals against. They have a 13-15-4 record at home, but a 7-22-5 record on the road. Chicago has a 3-5-2 record in the last 10 games. Last in the Western Conference and last in the league are the San Jose Sharks, who have 45 points in 67 games. They have 177 goals for, but have yielded 250 goals against. San Jose has a 10-20-2 record at home and a miserable 8-20-7 record on the road. The Sharks are 3-5-2 in the last 10 games. Check out my hockey blog at hockeywiztalkshockey.blogspot.com. Follow me on Facebook and Instagram at hockeywiz777. The Florida Panthers, Toronto Maple Leafs, and Tampa Bay Lightning currently hold the top 3 seeds in the Atlantic Division, with the Ottawa Senators sitting 4 points behind Tampa for the 3rd seed in the Atlantic. The Washington Capitals, Carolina Hurricanes, and New Jersey Devils hold the top 3 seeds in the Metropolitan Division, with the Columbus Blue Jackets sitting 8 points behind New Jersey for the 3rd seed in the Metro. 7 of the playoff spots are pretty much set. It's just a matter of seeding. The Columbus Blue Jackets hold the 2nd wildcard spot with 70 points, and there are 7 teams behind them that are fighting for that spot, including the New York Rangers, Montreal Canadiens, Detroit Red Wings, Boston Bruins, New York Islanders, Philadelphia Flyers, and Pittsburgh Penguins. The New York Rangers pose the biggest threat to the Blue Jackets as they have the talent and experience to make a run in the second half, and they have the same amount of points. The Winnipeg Jets, Dallas Stars, and Colorado Avalanche currently hold the top 3 seeds in the Central Division, with the Minnesota Wild just 2 points behind Colorado for the 3rd seed in the Central. The Vegas Golden Knights, LA Kings, and Edmonton Oilers currently hold the top 3 seeds in the Pacific, with the Calgary Flames 7 points behind Calgary, with the Calgary Flames 7 points behind Edmonton for the 3rd seed in the Pacific. 7 of the playoff spots are pretty much set. It's just a matter of seeding. The Calgary Flames hold the 2nd wildcard spot with 71 points, and there are 3 teams in the race behind them, including the Vancouver Canucks, Utah Hockey Club, and St. Louis Blues. The Vancouver Canucks and St. Louis Blues pose the greatest threat to Calgary with the talent they have on those teams. Listen to Hockey Wiz Talks podcast on Podbean and Spotify. As the season winds down, the playoff picture is starting to clear up, and it will be interesting to see which of these teams in the race grabs the final wildcard spot. In my next podcast, I'll be talking about what's next for the San Jose Sharks.